hard-working waitress has spent years enduring the disrespect of customers who see her as nothing more than someone to serve them. But one night, when she's pushed too far, she finally speaks up, only to be fired on the spot. Just when it seems like all hope is lost, someone unexpected has been watching the whole time. What happens next will change her life forever. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. The tray slipped slightly in Imani Carter's hands as she navigated through the sea of white faces, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been working at Brentwood Grill for nearly 5 years, long enough to perfect the art of balancing plates and swallowing her pride. She plastered a polite smile on her face as she reached table 12, where an older white couple sat, the woman draped in a fur shawl despite the warm temperature inside. Imani could already tell this was going to be one of those tables. "I ordered medium rare," the woman snapped, pushing her plate away before Imani even had a chance to set down the sides. "This is practically still breathing." "I apologize for that, ma'am," Imani said smoothly, reaching for the plate. "I'll have the kitchen fix it right away." The woman let out a dramatic sigh, nudging her husband, who simply shook his head, unimpressed. "Honestly, is it so hard to get an order right?" she muttered under her breath. Imani ignored it. She had mastered the art of selective hearing. She turned on her heels, walking quickly back toward the kitchen, but not before catching a glimpse of a woman seated alone at a corner booth. A tall, elegant black woman with sleek pressed curls and an air of effortless power. She was watching. She had been watching all night. Back in the kitchen, Imani exhaled sharply, gripping the counter to steady herself. "A problem with table 12? Marcus, the head chef, asked, already looking irritated. "You know how it is," Imani said, shaking her head. "White folks love to complain." Marcus chuckled dryly and took the plate. "I got you, don't worry." Imani leaned against the wall for just a moment before she heard the sharp, impatient voice of her manager, Scott Reynolds, cutting through the kitchen noise. "Carter, what the hell are you doing?" Imani straightened immediately, turning to face him. Scott was in his mid-40s, balding with the kind of smirk that made her skin crawl. He always spoke to her like he was daring her to step out of line. "Table 12 complained about their steak," she explained. "I'm getting it redone." Scott scoffed. "Maybe if you paid attention, we wouldn't have to waste expensive cuts of meat." Imani clenched her jaw. "I didn't cook it." Scott took a step closer, lowering his voice. "I don't need attitude from the help. Just do your damn job." Imani's fists clenched at her sides, but she said nothing. She turned back to the kitchen, willing herself to stay calm. By the time she returned to table 12, the woman was drumming her manicured nails against the table. "Took long enough," she muttered. Imani forced another smile, setting down the plate. "I appreciate your patience." She turned to leave when she heard the woman mutter under her breath, "God, these people are so slow." Something inside Imani snapped. She froze. "These people." She turned around. "Excuse me?" The woman barely looked up. "I said, I hope this steak is finally cooked right. I'd hate to send it back again." Imani's blood boiled. "I heard what you said." The woman sighed dramatically. "Oh, please. No need to get so sensitive." Imani opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Scott was already at her side. He must have seen everything. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice tight. "Yes, your waitress is giving us an attitude," the woman said, feigning innocence. "I'm not sure she's a good fit for this restaurant." Scott turned to Imani, his eyes dark with warning. "Carter, back to the kitchen, now." Imani didn't move. She was done. Scott's brows shot up. "Excuse me?" "I said no," Imani repeated, her voice firm. "I am tired of being spoken to like I'm less than. I show up here every day, I work twice as hard as anyone else, and I keep my mouth shut, but I'm not doing that anymore." The restaurant had gone quiet. Other diners had stopped eating to watch the scene unfold. Scott's face turned red. "Then you can pack your things, you're fired." The words hit her like a slap. Imani felt her stomach drop, but she refused to let it show. She wouldn't give Scott or these customers the satisfaction of seeing her break. For the first time since she started working at Brentwood Grill, she lifted her chin and met Scott's gaze. Fine. She untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table. She turned on her heels, walking toward the back to grab her things, but as she did, her eyes flickered toward the woman in the corner booth. The woman was still watching, and for the first time that night, she smiled. Imani's hands were shaking as she grabbed her coat from the staff locker. The sting of humiliation sat heavy in her chest, but beneath it something stronger burned. For years she had swallowed her pride, endured the entitled complaints, the microaggressions, the degrading way Scott spoke to her. She had kept her head down because she needed the money, because she didn't have the luxury of quitting, because people like her, black women, weren't granted second chances as easily as the white servers who came and went. But she was done. She wasn't going to let this define her. The moment she stepped out of the back, the restaurant was still eerily silent. All eyes were on her as she walked toward the front door, shoulders squared, refusing to let them see her break. But then, wait. The voice was rich, powerful, commanding. Everyone turned. The woman from the corner booth had risen from her seat, setting down her cloth napkin with a quiet deliberation. She was tall, her dark skin radiant under the dim chandelier light, and there was something about her presence that immediately demanded attention. Scott stiffened. "Ma'am, I apologize for... I wasn't talking to you." Her voice cut through the room like a blade. Scott's mouth snapped shut. Imani blinked, unsure of what was happening. The woman's gaze settled on her, steady, unreadable, and then she smiled. "I'd like to have a word with you," she said smoothly, gesturing to the booth she had just vacated. Imani hesitated. She could feel Scott's eyes burning into the back of her skull. She could feel the judgment radiating from the diners who had watched her stand up for herself, expecting her to crumble under the weight of her mistake. But there was something in the woman's voice, something that made her trust her. "So," she nodded, and she sat down. Silence stretched between them as the woman studied her, taking a slow sip of her wine. Up close, she was even more striking, her presence exuding power and control. Finally, she spoke. "You handled that well," she said simply. Imani scoffed. "I got fired." The woman smirked. "No. You were liberated." Imani blinked. The woman leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. "You don't belong here," she continued, her voice silk smooth but unwavering. "I've been watching you all night, the way you carry yourself, the way you handle difficult people. You're far too intelligent to be wasting your talent, catering to entitled diners who see you as nothing more than an accessory to their meal." Imani's throat tightened. She had spent so many years being overlooked, minimized, belittled, and here was this stranger telling her she was more than that. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman's lips curled into a knowing smile. "Evelyn Sinclair." Imani's breath caught in her throat. Evelyn Sinclair. The name alone sent a ripple of shock through her body. The woman sitting across from her wasn't just anybody. She was a legend, one of the most powerful black women in business, a billionaire, CEO of Sinclair Enterprises, and she had been watching her. "I don't understand," Imani said after a moment, her voice shaky. "Why are you even here?" Evelyn chuckled, swirling her wineglass. "I own this restaurant." Imani nearly choked on air. "You what?" Evelyn's eyes gleamed with amusement. "I own it," she repeated. "Brentwood Grill is one of several high-end establishments under my company's investment portfolio. I make it a point to occasionally visit incognito, see how things are running." Imani felt her stomach twist. Scott had no idea that his boss had been sitting in the dining room, watching him fire an employee for standing up for herself. "This restaurant makes a lot of money," Evelyn continued, tilting her head. But money isn't enough for me. I need my businesses to uphold values that align with my own. And frankly, I don't tolerate mediocrity or bigotry. Imani could barely process what she was hearing. So, what are you saying? Evelyn smirked. In saying your manager just signed his own termination letter. The air in Imani's lungs disappeared. So Evelyn set her glass down with a quiet clink. That man, Scott, he's a liability. If he's treating employees like you this way in public, imagine what he does when no one's watching. I don't keep liabilities on my payroll. Imani was speechless. Scott, the man who had spoken to her like she was disposable for years, was about to lose his job because Evelyn Sinclair had seen him for who he really was. Wait here, Evelyn said, rising gracefully from her seat. I have business to attend to. The entire restaurant watched in stunned silence as Evelyn Sinclair strolled toward the front counter, where Scott was standing, confusion clouding his face. Imani wasn't close enough to hear everything, but she saw the moment Scott realized who she was, saw the way his face drained of color, saw the way his lips parted, stammering, scrambling for an explanation, and then saw the way Evelyn simply tilted her head and whispered something in his ear. Scott stumbled back, his face crumpled, and just like that, he was done. He didn't argue, didn't fight, because what argument could he possibly make? When Evelyn Sinclair decided you were gone, you were gone. Within minutes, the assistant manager rushed forward, speaking hurriedly to Scott before leading him out the door. Evelyn turned, met Imani's gaze across the room, and smiled. Then she walked back to the table and sat down as if nothing had happened. I believe you're owed an apology, she said smoothly. Imani stared at her. Her mind was still racing, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just some stranger showing kindness. Evelyn Sinclair was deliberate, and she had plans for her. Know that that's handled, Evelyn continued, setting down a sleek black business card in front of Imani. I'd like to discuss an opportunity with you. Imani hesitated before picking up the card, her breath catching at the embossed gold lettering. Sinclair Enterprises, Office of the CEO. I need an assistant, Evelyn said simply. Not just someone to take notes. Someone sharp. Someone who understands people. Someone with a backbone. Imani looked up, her pulse quickening. I think that someone is you. The words hit her like a freight train. She had spent years scraping by, believing she was stuck in place, that the best she could hope for was a bigger tip at the end of the night. But now, sitting across from one of the most powerful black women in America, she realized something. Maybe she had been wrong. Maybe this was the moment everything changed. Imani held the black business card in her trembling hands, running her fingers over the embossed gold lettering. Sinclair Enterprises, Office of the CEO. The weight of it felt unreal, as if she were in a dream. She glanced up at Evelyn, who watched her with the same measured confidence she had displayed all night. There was no pity in her gaze, no patronizing tone, just an offer, an opportunity. Imani started, but her throat closed up. She cleared it and tried again. I don't understand. Evelyn's lips quirked slightly. What's there to understand? Imani blinked, still struggling to grasp the situation. 1 minute she had been fired, the next she was being offered something bigger than she could have ever imagined. Evelyn chuckled, swirling the last of her wine. Darling, I don't waste my time playing games. Imani exhaled sharply, staring at the card like it might disappear if she looked away. I don't have a degree, she admitted, her voice hesitant. I don't have corporate experience. I don't... Evelyn raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. Let me tell you what I see, she said smoothly. I see a woman who has worked twice as hard for half the recognition. I see a woman who is quick on her feet, who knows how to handle people. A woman who refuses to let others trample over her. Imani's breath caught in her chest. Degrees and experience, Evelyn continued. Those can be taught. Grit, That's something you either have or you don't, and I think you have it. Imani's heart pounded. Look, Evelyn said, leaning in slightly. I'm not asking you to make a decision tonight, but if you're willing to take a chance on yourself, come to my office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. We'll talk details. Imani swallowed hard. She could feel the eyes of the remaining diners still burning into her, but at this moment she didn't care, because this moment was hers. She nodded. I'll be there. Evelyn's smile widened. Good. And with that she rose, draping her sleek designer coat over her shoulders. Oh, and one more thing, she added casually. Dinner's on me. With a final knowing glance, she turned and walked out the door. Imani sat there for a long moment, staring at the empty space where Evelyn Sinclair had just sat. And for the first time in years she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Hope. The next morning, Imani's fingers hovered over the keypad of the elevator, her pulse thrumming in her ears. The towering glass building that housed Sinclair Enterprises gleamed in the morning sun, making her feel impossibly small. But she wasn't small. Not anymore. With a deep breath, she pressed the button for the top floor. The ride was smooth, but her nerves weren't. By the time the doors slid open, she felt entirely out of place in her carefully pressed blazer, one of the only professional pieces of clothing she owned. A sharp-eyed receptionist greeted her at the front desk. Miss Carter? Imani nodded. Miss Sinclair is expecting you, the woman said, motioning toward the sleek glass doors ahead. Imani swallowed her nerves and stepped inside. The office was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, while rich mahogany furniture exuded elegance and authority. And there, standing by the window, was Evelyn Sinclair. You're punctual, Evelyn noted, turning with a pleased expression. I didn't want to be late, Imani replied, her voice steadier than she expected. Evelyn gestured to a seat across from her massive desk. Good, because time is the one thing I don't like to waste. Imani sat, clasping her hands in her lap. I won't sugarcoat this, Evelyn began. This job will push you in ways you've never been pushed before. You'll be handling high-profile clients, organizing business meetings, managing my schedule, and, most importantly, learning. Imani nodded, absorbing every word. You won't start as an executive assistant, Evelyn continued. You'll start as a junior associate. You'll be paid well, far more than that restaurant ever gave you, and in 6 months, if you prove yourself, we'll talk about moving up. Imani's heart skipped a beat. 6 months? An actual career path? Do you think you can handle that? Evelyn asked, her expression unreadable. Imani lifted her chin. Yes. Evelyn smiled, a real smile, full of approval. Then welcome to Sinclair Enterprises. She extended her hand. Imani grasped it firmly, sealing the biggest moment of her life. 2 years later, the soft click of heels echoed across the polished floors as Imani Carter strode through the glass halls of Sinclair Enterprises, her tailored navy suit fitting her like a second skin. Phones rang, assistants scurried, executives nodded as she passed, because now they knew her name. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't the girl struggling to make ends meet. She was executive director of operations, the right-hand woman to one of the most powerful business moguls in the country. And today, she had her own meeting to lead. With a deep breath, she pushed open the boardroom doors and stepped into the future she had built for herself.